Alright everyone, this is the type of video where you grab a cuppa, pop this on in the background, do some chores and just chill out with me, because in this video I am going to be sharing with you my book journaling process. This is something I decided I wanted to do. So what I'm going to do in this video is quickly catch you all up, because I know I have been MIA for a hot second. So many life updates. But also going to give you my reviews for the books I have read so far this year. I might not get through all of them. It's a journey. I've had quite a good reading year. So yeah, grab yourself a cuppa, make sure you are comfortable, and let's get into this. Okay, so really quick life update first. As you know, we are in Melbourne, Australia, and we have been hunting for an apartment, just waiting for the finances to stabilise, and we are moving in on Saturday. Don't worry, I am, for the record, like it's Tuesday right now. But don't worry, I am vlogging it and recording as much of that process as possible. But as I've mentioned previously, I'm finding it really hard to vlog and do videos where I currently am because of the littlies running around. But yeah, sorry, I keep saying I'm so out of practice. But that's the living update. In terms of a job update, I have found that I really love the school that I am at, so I have decided to apply for a position. Fingers crossed that all goes well. But that's just a very brief update. In terms of life, I'm really excited because it all has come together in what feels like to be the perfect moment. But anyway, that's a quick life update. Let's get on to the books that I have read so far this year. Alrighty, let's do this. So if my maths is correct, I have read about 43 books. I probably should have added them up before this, but nah, it's alright. We've started the voiceover now. The first book that I read, or more accurately finished, in 2023 is The Final Girl Support Group, which I gave 4.5 stars. So, have you ever wondered about what happens to massacre survivors? In this latest Hendricks novel, we follow Lynette Tarkington, 22 years after she survives the slaughter of her family. Every month, Lynette and other final girls meet up for a group counselling session, and all is going well, as it can be for final girls, until they start being killed off by a new nightmare. So, the characters were definitely my favourite aspect of this novel. As mentioned, we follow Lynette, but the other final girls were just as thought out, each with their own gruesomely tragic backstory. I found that everyone had a really valid role to play in the story, and genuinely, it advanced the plot. Sure, there were times where Lynette herself, she got a bit annoying, but I think that it made her more realistic. You could also really see Hendrix's love of horror and thrasher films in this book, because each of his characters is based on a main character from a famous film. So for example, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Scream, and there were interspersed script pages and evidence extracts intersected throughout the chapters. To be honest, I don't know much about horror cinema, as I am terrible with those types of films. I literally jumped in Despicable Me 2. Me number 2 once, so I'm terribly underqualified to say whether his allusions to those films was done with justice, but I did like it. I did have to hold it back from being a 5-star read though, because I made it about a third of the way in, got distracted by another book, and I totally forgot I was reading this one. I would also describe this as more of a thriller too. Lots of gore, huge trigger warning for gore and murder, but the idea of a chase was front and center, so it didn't have me feeling super creeped out. I was more curious about what would happen next. So I do recommend this novel if you like horror thrasher movies, whodunit kind of mysteries, unreliable narrators, gore, novels with flashbacks, and all of that sort of stuff. Book number 2 was Home Before Dark. This was a haunted house horror story where we follow Maggie Holt, who has constantly lived under her father's shadow. Why? Because he wrote a book about their time in Bainbury Hole, which is where this super spooky, terrible thing happened, causing Maggie and her family to flee in the middle of the night. But Maggie's never believed a smidge of the book until she ends up inheriting Bainbury Hall and discovers her father may not have been lying after all. So I gave this one 4 stars. The dark and damp atmosphere in the novel was definitely a highlight for me. Sager really, is that even how you say it? Sager really made me feel like I was right there in Bainbury Hall when Mr. Shadow, who is this ghost, was watching her, and Miss Pennyface was creeping out of their amour, so the wardrobe and stuff. It was really creepy. The deadly berries surrounding the house, the brick wall shielding, and the haul off from the town, the suspicious leak in the kitchen roof, it all added to this drama. So the book is definitely one to consider putting on any sort of spooky October TBR kind of list if you have one. I do want to mention though that there were times I wasn't fully intrigued. I'm unsure if it was just my mind's response to not getting too creeped out, but I really struggled to get absorbed in the plot. I still recommend the book for sure, but there were times where it felt like things dragged on and I was waiting for the revelation that I knew was coming. But in saying that, I did really enjoy the changing point of view for each chapter. So some chapters were between Maggie's view and her father's book. I thought they were interwoven really well with what Maggie was experiencing or about to experience. So a lot of foreshadowing and a lot of linking between chapters, and it meant that we got to read a cool story within a story, which I think is pretty cool. Triggers for this one include murder cover-ups, stalking, mental illness, self-harm and child abuse. In all honesty, I feel like I've actually had a pretty good reading stint so far this year, because next up we have another 4-star read. This is In 5 Years. So the book blurb sets the premise of this novel as a romance where Dani is tragically lost between choosing between her reliable fiance or literal dream guy. However, for my own personal records, I would re-genreify this as a contemporary novel first and foremost. It's not like a big romance or any sort of science fiction time travel-y stuff going on. So we actually follow Dani, a headstrong and organised woman in her early 20s and 30s, and as this decade of her life progresses, Dani is forced to make some tough decisions, and there are some losses that were never part of her plan. So as you can see, the plot and intrigue sections of like my mind for this book took massive hits for the blurb really not having all that much to do with the actual book. It just really annoys me when that happens. So I went into this wanting a good proper love triangle where the main character has to figure out who she wants most, stability or excitement, that sort of cliche, but that's what I wanted. But it's not what I got, so I was disappointed. But I did still end up liking this because it was such a tearjerker. I can't really tell you what prompts this sadness, as it is a later plot point, but if you want the gist of it, I will be mentioning it in the triggers at the end of this review. So the triggers are kind of slightly spoilery, so heads up for that. So my absolute favourite part of this book is the friendship between Dani and her best friend Bella. So they've been inseparable since they were young girls, and although they have very different personalities, they love each other dearly. I also enjoyed the mention of how Bella would love to be a mother, whereas Dani could never picture herself in that role, and both women were okay with each other's differences. This novel really is a beautiful ode to friendship. So I recommend this to you if you like books where the men and romantic relationships are the secondary focus of the novel. Novels about grief, and if you like unlikely friendships, so triggers, so slightly spoilery. We've got chemotherapy, cancer, hospitals, loss of loved ones, and kind of crappy parents. Next up, we have the first V.E. Schwab book. Wait, I was going to say that I've finished. I think that might be a lie. The second one I finished. This is Gallant, and I gave it another 4 stars. So this is a YA paranormal fantasy novel which follows our non-verbally communicative main character, Olivia Pryor. She's abandoned at Maryland's girls' school where she's only 2 years old with nothing but her mother's diary, which rambles into madness. Olivia grows up knowing what it is to never feel accepted. That is, until she gets a mysterious letter summoning her home to the family estate of Gallant, where the Pryor family has guarded the gate to the other Gallant for generations. So one of my favourite elements of this novel was the atmosphere. You're going to learn as I go through my thoughts for these books that world building and atmosphere is a key thing, a key contributor for my reading enjoyment. So the two worlds, where one is colourful and one is not, screamed dark academia vibes. So definitely a book to consider putting again on your spooky season TBR. The house, which is called Gallant, really felt old school and lent towards creepy but cozy academic vibe, which is a trope I'm always here for, especially with the ghouls floating around too. I also enjoyed reading a novel with minimal dialogue, seeing as Olivia is unable to speak, and was impressed with Schwab's ability to evoke such vivid communication without the reliance of speech marks. A little side note though, I did see in the acknowledgements that she had someone check that the non-verbal communication side was an accurate representation of someone who uses sign language, so I was like proud, weirdly. Good on her for doing her homework. So whilst I did enjoy this novel, overall the art There were elements of the book which I did find predictable. However, I find this to be the case with a lot of the YA I read these days. Call it a curse of reading lots, but in saying that, it is sometimes fun to figure things out before the main character and see them come to the same conclusion as yourself. So I would recommend this book for lovers of the slightly creepy, parallel universes, dark academia, and novels which don't bother with any romance. Trigger warnings do include suicide, murder, blood, bullying, ghosts, and abandonment. And then boom shakalaka, we get to the first 5-star read of the year, which honestly shocked me so much and has kind of been the catalyst of a little reading side journey, a reading path I've gone down recently, and that is of like non-fiction and memoir kind of books. I've been reading about one a month, but anyway, I haven't even mentioned the book. It's Anthropocene Reviewed. So I rate the Anthropocene Reviewed a hearty 5 stars. Like, holy moly, I loved this collection of essays from John Green so much more than I thought I would, as my essay reading experience has left heaps to be desired. However, Green's personal elements and sometimes humour in each of his essays made it feel like I was also reading an educational autobiography. Another reason why I had such a successful time with this essay collection is due to how digestible each essay was. Only 2 to 6 pages each. I could make a meal of 10 in one go, or snack on them in one essay bites. So reading this has also helped me understand Green so much more. Somehow I feel like I am on a first name basis with him. It has added so much context to his other novels. In a way, I really wish that I had read this before reading his other books, as I think it would make me appreciate them more. And I did genuinely learn so much. I would actually love to purchase my own copy. All of these reads have been library copies, so I can go through and highlight my own quotes, scribble in the margins, and make notes of things I want to research further. Overall, I definitely recommend this to Green fans, people who like to read personal but educational stories, those who want to learn more of the world, and if you're looking for a starting point for getting into essays, I would recommend this. Triggers include mental health and illness, depression, suicidal thoughts, war, racial and religious events in time. We then get to the first kind of meh book of the year for me, and that was Daughter of the Moon Goddess. So this is about Xing Lin. So after having to flee her home, which is the moon, which also doubles as her mother's prison, Xing Lin is forced to disguise her heritage as she embarks on a quest to free her mother from imprisonment. This requires winning a competition. The whole reason I picked it up, I love competition books, so that she can learn how to fight and harness her magic, so that she can fight and seek favour from the same man who exiled her mother, the Celestial Emperor. So let me start with the positive, the setting and atmosphere. I absolutely loved it, and the best way I can describe it is as though it was painted in pastel watercolours. If you see the book cover, you'll have a bit of a visual representation of how the whole book feels. So think of the map like a double layered cake. So where the top layer is the immortal celestial layer, where most of the action takes place, and the bottom layer is the mortal realm, where gods, aka celestials, are no more than stories and magic is not a thing. But this book has been a marker of change in reading choices, as it's confirmed for me that YA fantasy is no longer really my vibe. I've just read so many YA fantasy books that I can see the tropes coming a mile away, dialogue has become cheesy, and the plot has become really predictable. Basically, what I'm saying is that this book isn't objectively bad, it just doesn't bring much newness. Trade out the characters and the setting, and it's pretty much any YA fantasy book with a revenge plot and a love triangle. Still not a bad book though. I think it just shows how one's reading tastes can evolve. So I recommend this novel to readers who have yet to get sick of the same old fantasy tropes. If you're into mythology, you might like it. This novel is based on a myth. If you enjoy revenge quest plots like whimsical settings, and triggers do include mild PTSD, intent to sexually abuse, a scene where a character is paralysed, murder, and the gore that comes with fights and conflicts. It was after that book that I actually found myself in a bit of a reading slump at the beginning of the year, but I managed to dig my way out of it by picking up Judgment in Death. So this was also a book to fill Books and Lala's Buzzwordathon prompt, where the title had to include a word, life or death. And this series has always been a good one for getting me out of little troughs of reading slumps. So if you don't know, this series follows Lieutenant Eve Dallas, who is a homicide detective. This particular installation of the In Death series follows a serial killer who brutally murders dirty, bribe-accepting police people, policemen, I think specifically. The murders are also somehow tied to a con who slipped through the NYPD's fingers in a previous bust, and Eve, as always, uses her brains and skills to figure out the classic whodunit. And look, the reality is I'm completely biased when writing this review, as I love the series. It's a comforting, familiar place where I know I will always be entertained and never see the end coming. Granted, I don't try that hard to figure out either. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not that person who often sits there and tries to figure out what's happening, which is why it's such an issue for me if I can predict what's happening, because then it just means it's been too obvious. This one has dropped a half star though due to a steamy scene between Eve and her husband Rourke. Normally I don't mind there are 16 passionate scenes, however one scene slightly crossed the line from passion to not really giving Eve a choice. I do feel like I need to say though that everything was consensual and that there was a good conversation about how, in quote marks, icky it made the pair feel. So overall, I do recommend this series to readers who like a good serial killer whodunit kind of book, a mystery where there is also a decent deal of romance, and readers who just need a fast-paced, guilty pleasure kind of murder to solve. So triggers in this one include sexual abuse, murder through various gruesome means, hospital settings, and general violence. After having such a good time with that book though, we then get to a DNF, the first DNF, and a shocking DNF. The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Somehow your girl didn't like it. I told myself if I get to page 50 and I'm bored, then I need to DNF a book. So that's why I DNF'd this. Let me start by saying the idea of the plot, so repeating days until the murder is solved, is quite interesting, that whole time loop idea. The setting and atmosphere of the mansion were also described really well. Turton did a good job setting the scene. I even liked the characters, but my problem? I was bored. I tried really hard to make it to the next section of the book where the days start to repeat on themselves and our mystery solver wakes up in a new body, but I couldn't. The pacing in this was just too long and I wasn't given enough to keep pushing through with it. Frankly, I wasn't given enough to care about. If you loved this book and think I should give it another go, let me know and I could put it on like my books to try again list, but for now it's a solid DNF. It was at this point where I decided I was going to try and pick up some books for a reading vlog. You guys never saw the reading vlog, life just got too busy, but the whole theme was going to be like Australian books. So I picked up Looking for Alibrandi and I gave it 5 stars. So overall it was a pretty solid read, especially considering that I was really in the mood for a contemporary novel. It hit the spot. Recently, as I've just told you, recently to reading this book, I had been lamenting the fact that YA novels had not been hitting the spot. I've really become a mood reader. However, I am happy to report that this book really hit that YA contemporary craving. Something about it was just so raw and real. So the way it was written is from Josephine's point of view, and although it wasn't laid out in diary entries, that's how I chose to read the chapters because everything felt super personal. It also helped that just Josephine's own personality could go down a bit smoother, as she could be quite annoying, but in a way that made her seem like a real life person. So whilst talking about characters, I loved seeing the presence of a grandmother figure who is still dealing with her own generation's upbringing and trying to wrap her head around the new generation's way of life, aka not living beneath a traditional and patriarchal model. Also, this might be a slight spoiler, but considering the book is over 20 years old, it should be okay. The romance in this was quite refreshing. It wasn't one of those totally cliched endings to a teenage romance. Sure, there were definitely still cliches. You have the bad boy vibe with the motorbike and all of that, but I like to see a teenage relationship that wasn't perfect. A last note before I keep going on with this one. This is a book focusing on the Italian experience in Australia. And so I do think it's pertinent. Wait, is that the word I'm looking for? It's important that, like, for me to read that, because there isn't much. How do I word this? I think it was important to read for me because I haven't read much from that point of view. However, the rest of the diversity in this novel, there isn't really much. I'm pretty certain I can say decently confidently that the only ethnicities we see are Italian and European. Whilst this isn't necessarily a bad thing, I do think it shows the times a little bit, but I've also learned that Australians do not seem to, okay, this is going to sound rude, but they don't seem to treasure Indigenous Aboriginal culture as much as New Zealand prides themselves on Indigenous Māori culture. And this is obviously talking in generalizations. It's like I'm still so new to the country, and I'm seeing more and more of how people treasure and respect and celebrate Aboriginal culture. It's just not to the same degree as New Zealand. So I think it's kind of eye-opening for me to realize how culture-focused Aotearoa is. But yeah, that's kind of an aside. So I do recommend this novel for readers who want a slice of life kind of contemporary, which might enlighten you to help people of a different ethnicity live and balance their cultures, as well as a novel which has some cliches, but also breaks some cliches. Triggers do include a huge warning for suicide, self-harm, and depression. All right, I have just realized how quickly we're running out of time, so let me do 2 more really quick. So, Meet Cute. Possibly the worst book I've read so far this year is 2 stars. To just quickly break it down, it's a bunch of novels about falling in love instantly. And I don't know why I picked this up, because I know quick burn romances are not for me, but this was just a bit ridiculous. Look, overall, I didn't mind the reading experience, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless you're okay with super cheesy quick burn stories. It feels like this one just wasn't for me. I loved the LGBT plus representation. I loved the body diversity. I loved the culture diversity. It hit all of those markers. And something that's important for novels is, something that's important for telling a story is they need to be good stories. And I just don't like quick burn romances. And then the last one I will talk about today is Rule of Wolves. I finally finished that whole Lee Bardugo series, with Rule of Wolves being 5 stars. It felt like the end of an era, to be honest. I started the Grishaverse trilogy back in my master's year at uni, so that's like, I don't know, maths ago. And that series was one of the first things I reviewed on this Bookstagram account. On my Bookstagram account. I'm totally aware that the Rule of Wolves is technically the end of a duology, but in my mind it's the end of the whole Grishaverse thing. Did the end of this feel like there could still be books in the future? Yeah, like there's definitely some plot lines which could keep going, but for now we're done. I'll keep it concise, guys. I loved it. I thought it was a great way to resolve all the conflict that had happened in the previous books. We also got to see other characters we had seen before, which was just a cherry on top, so I am very happy to report I was not disappointed with how that series ended. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'm only like a third of the way through catching you guys up on the books I've read, so I don't know how I will preface or set up the upcoming other books that I need to tell you about. Maybe I'll do a classic wrap-up, but I enjoyed this, just chatting to you and showing you some wrap-up things. Maybe I'll just do another journal video and talk over the top of that. Just let me know what you prefer. I often find it really hard sitting in front of the camera with my face doing reviews. I tend to ramble, but this was a lot easier because I had my reviews in front of me to help me structure what I was saying. In terms of where to next, I'm going to finish editing this video, upload it, and then this is the start of me trying to get my ass into gear and being a lot more dedicated with sharing with sharing videos again. I really want to get back into it. I do love the booktube space. So yeah, that's just where I am. The big move is on Saturday, so I'm sure I will be able to what's the phrase I'm looking for? Get back into it? I don't know. It's late at night and I'm shattered. So with all that being said and done, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. Sorry again for being absent, but I am honestly hand on heart right now. I'm saying this with my hand on my heart. I'm going to try my absolute hardest to get back into some consistent YouTube releases. So yeah, let me know what you guys have read. Honestly, I'm just filling in time to the end of this video now. I've got 20 seconds left. That's all I did. Okay. Why did I leave this part of the video in? I'm just closing my journal. Bethany, what are you up to, girl? Man, I need to get back into editing. Okay. Bloop, 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 bloop. Yeah, bye-bye. See you in the next video.